Hi, kia ora, and welcome to Creative Connections, where we have beautiful, inspiring conversations with artists living in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm your host, Mandy Jakic. Jo Tricker is a glass artist based in Tauranga in the Bay of Plenty, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Jo creates glass-fused, slumped, cast and lampworked objects that are shaped by a love of literature and travel and the people from different cultures that she has met along the way. Jo is an exuberant storyteller. In this episode, she talks about her younger life living in the UK and studying English and linguistics at Massey University, and her initial love of mosaics, which 14 years ago led to learning about glass screen printing, lampworking, and glass fusing. She shares why she only now feels she's getting to really understand what she's all about as an artist, and why she does what she does. Jo works in series, which often use different techniques or are based on different ideas. She explains how she juggles the various series of work, her time making as a busy mother, and how she manages being an extrovert alongside spending so much time alone in her studio. And she describes the process for her most current series, Mythology of Fruit. Jo shares some really excellent advice, philosophies and reflections for artists and people wanting to develop a creative career. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed meeting Jo. This episode is generously brought to you by Chartwell Trust. Kia ora, Jo.
Kia ora, Mandy.
Lovely to meet you.
You too. Yeah, I've been listening to you for a long time, so this is a real pleasure.
Now, you are living in Tauranga in the Bay of Plenty. Tell us what you love about living there.
I was sort of more central Tauranga up until just 2 years ago, so we've now moved on to the sort of edge, so on the Tauriko side, which is on the sort of nearly at the base of the Kaimais. And what I love about being here is because I love swimming, and the Kaimais have lots of secret water holes that you only kind of find out if you know somebody. So yeah, I love just being quite near to the rivers that are further up in the hills. Yeah, we also have a river at the bottom of our lane, which is fabulous. You don't even have to get in the car. You just walk down and there's a river there. So yeah, feeling very fortunate and blessed with that actually. So yeah. And since I've been here, I think because we've got 4,000 square meters and we look out down to the valley where that river is, and it's just lovely being here. So yeah, it's been a really interesting move in that respect. So, yeah,
that sounds so beautiful. I'll have to come down. You can show me all the secret water holes.
Oh yeah, definitely come down and see the studio. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah.
I actually need to do like some sort of year-long tour and go visiting all the people I've spoken to. I would love that.
Oh, big roadie! You'd have lots of free places to stay, Mandy.
I know. Imagine it. It'd be so great.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Can you tell us where you were born, Jo, and how creativity presented itself for you as a child?
So born in Tamaki Makaurau in Auckland. Mum and dad, so basically I grew up in Pakuranga, and I often, when I got older, I always said to Mum and Dad, how did you end up there? Because I always felt like it wasn't really them. But Dad worked in Manukau City, and so it was closer to work sort of thing. And I'm not sure if you're old enough to remember, Mandy, but back in the 70s, it was known as Bim Valley. Pakuranga, white middle class, and they had that cleaning ad on the TV.
Yes, I do. I am old enough.
So I always think that's quite funny. But no, I loved growing up there. I had a great childhood. Had a great, and when I was a teenager up until about 24. So I grew up with a mother who was a fine painter, who also very crafty. So she made puppets and she made our dining room table out of kauri. At night school, she did woodworking. She did leather making with punching. She knitted, she sewed, she did copper work. She did just pretty much everything. And then a dad who was more literary, really. He didn't work in the writing field, but he has always loved writing and also good at making things. He's made, when my boys were younger, he's made them a really cool wooden toy each, which has become a family heirloom. But no, I never did art at school or anything. Didn't really kick until much later. Yeah.
A bit later.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. But your parents as creative, well, it sounds like your mum definitely was very creative, but they both encouraged creativity, do you think?
Yeah, they pretty much encouraged anything. I mean, pretty much anything you were interested in, they got behind. My mum's mum, my grandmother, was also a weaver. So she lived in Onehunga and had a house on the edge of the cliff there that looked out to the harbour, and her garden wound all the way down to the bottom. So she was an amazing gardener, but she also had one of those huge floor-based looms, weaving loom. And so as a kid, you'd go in and you'd watch her feet sort of doing that pedaling thing, and the shuttle doing that sort of dance across the wool. So she made lots of textile stuff. So yeah, it was all kind of in the family. But also, that's kind of what people did. And there's big gaps in my family. Like my mum's just turned 98.
Wow.
And so, that generation, they made lots of stuff.
They were makers.
Yes.
Yeah, it was quite
They're
different,
very much
wasn't it?
a product of its time too, if you like. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you left school, you went into medical labs and things like that and became really more scientific.
Yes.
And then you did lots of other things before you discovered your passion for glass. So can you tell us a little bit about that journey from high school and then up to when you became a glass artist?
So I do remember, just because my youngest is now in seventh form, made me think about, when you left school, I didn't really have a set idea ever of what I wanted to do, but I did really like science and biology, but I also did classical studies and English and maths and accounting and all of that. So yeah, I kind of liked everything. Anyway, I just saw it was a really tiny ad in the newspaper back then. That's how jobs were advertised. And I just thought, oh yeah, that looks quite good. And I applied and got an interview and got it. But I loved working in the laboratories up until they became automated. So after I'd been there about 5 or 6 years, I think, they would bring in huge machines that would take 1,000 blood samples at a time, and literally all you did was put the blood sample onto the machine, load it up, press a button, and it did everything. So it just became a bit like working in a factory.
Yeah.
Really automated. And prior to that, we'd done, you'd done the testing with test tubes and measuring liquids and watching the chemical changes with your eyes and that sort of thing. We even mouth pipetted cyanide back in the day, and I'm talking like mid-80s. Like there was none of that health and safety. On the microscopy table, so we would look at the little blood slides. Everybody smoked. They had a table with like 8 microscopes. Half the people had cigarettes just hanging out of their mouth, and the ash would drop down
Oh my
beside
God.
the microscopes. But it was such an awesome group of people, so I loved that. But yeah, it became automated.
I can imagine that that actually does link in a little bit with your glass practice, with just with, combining chemicals
Yes.
and yeah, it feels like there's
Yeah.
quite a
Yeah.
synergy.
Yeah, there is. And like just like looking at things like gravity and flow, and even because every time you do a firing cycle, you write down what you've done. So, the size of your piece, the thickness, the color, how you stacked it in the kiln, and then what your firing cycle was. So all of that is very much linked back to laboratory work. Um, and yeah, the actual scientific properties of glass really fascinate me too, but I haven't, it's just a whole nother world. So I haven't got to that, really in-depth part of it yet. And then what happened? Oh, no, that's right. No, I was going out with somebody I was going out with a boy who decided to go overseas. And I just thought, oh, yeah, I'll go too. That sounds good. And so I left New Zealand, I think it was 24, had no idea what I was doing, Mandy. I didn't even have a backpack or sleeping bag. I just rocked up to Manchester, of all places, and I'd left here in December and arrived in Manchester in the middle of winter. It didn't get light till 10:30, and it was dark again at 3:30. And the dogs all wore jackets, and I'm like, these dogs wearing jackets going, this is so weird. and the dogs are allowed in the buses and they're allowed in the pubs, which I thought was great, but it was these funny little random memories you have of the UK, and also thinking that because we all spoke the same language, that you would immediately, be similar. But of course it's not at
Yeah.
all, even though you
Yeah.
speak the language. So that was all a bit of a shock. So yeah, did the OE. It's a funny pull, I think, when you've lived overseas. You always have that push me, pull you type feeling, like you love being there, but at the same time, just started to miss being able to walk in bare feet. Being able to drive, because I didn't drive anywhere in the UK, Europe, because you didn't really need a car, but there's something about driving that has that real sense of freedom, and the beach. And so after 3 years, I came back from the UK. But then when I came back, I had reverse culture shock. Like, yeah, just like, oh my God, this place is weird. Where's all the people? Everything shuts at like 9 o'clock at night, that sort of thing. But anyway,
Yeah.
I did a year in Rotorua doing tourism, of all things. 'Cause I thought, oh, I've travelled. This would be fun. This is what I, want to do. And I hated it. And I got my first E ever, which is for economics, and thought, no, this isn't right. So moved back to Auckland, went to Massey at Albany, which back then had only been open for 5 years, and absolutely loved it. Loved the campus, loved the lecturers that I met. And I was also, I was 27, so I wanted to be there. And so I did, I studied English and linguistics, and a bit of, other anthropology, history, all that sort of stuff. Then I thought I'd teach English as a second language. So when uni was done, I went and did a second language teaching course. And then I had planned to go overseas again. I had a job lined up in Korea. And at that time, they had a surplus of jobs. And I thought, oh, I don't really want to go overseas and come back to nothing again. So I postponed the job, and I went up north and found a section, and I bought a section in, Ruakaka, near Waipu Cove. Yep. So I bought a section there. Was still planning to go to Korea, and then I met Kevin on a camping holiday. And long story short, 25 years later, I'm still here in Tauranga. So
Wow.
Anyway, amongst all of that, somewhere I got asked if I wanted to go and do a mosaic workshop. I didn't have any idea what mosaics was, so I just said yes. And so I did that and then was still working full-time, but got obsessed with the mosaics and went to, so I think I've been doing it for maybe 7 years as a hobby. And I went to the Mosaic Symposium of Australia, which was in Tasmania. And one of the speakers there, every single feather on her bird sculpture was a piece of fused glass. And so I'd never heard of fused glass because the only genre you hear about is glass blowing because, it's really hot and it's sexy and it's exciting. And stumbled on that, came back to New Zealand and just was fascinated and just wanted to find out what that was and learn it. But it took a really long time. I think it took a year and a half after that because it's such a niche, small, when you're on the outside, it seems like such a small niche community. And it was really hard to find out where to learn stuff. And I think even now that can still be a problem. So
what were you thinking at that time? Were you thinking of it as a hobby and something that you wanted to learn and to do on the side? Or did you have any plans of actually becoming a full-time artist?
No, not at all. No, not at all. No, that was, because I think when I did I stumbled on a pamphlet somewhere advertising I think it was Wanganui Open Summer Courses or something. And Wanganui's always been the centre of glass in New Zealand because they used to have a full-time glass degree there at Wanganui UCOL, which unfortunately closed in 2015 due to lack of funding. But prior to that, because of that full-time degree, they had summer schools and they had guest glass artists coming out to teach. And so around all of that, you had a satellite community of artists who'd been through that program and had set up their studio there. So that was the place to go to learn. But when I did my first workshop, unknown to me, I was pregnant with my first child. And so I did the first workshop and just loved it.
And what workshop was that? What was the main focus at the beginning?
It wasn't really melting glass. It was doing, it was screen printing. It was doing sort of decals onto the surface of glass. And I had no idea what I was booking into, really. I just thought it sounded interesting. But it turned out we hardly did anything in the kiln. Like there was only like sort of at the very end where you fired a flat piece. Then I went up to Whangarei and did a lamp working workshop, which is melting. This is one of the other genres that no one really knows about. So there's lamp working is like the small version of glass blowing where you melt glass on a gas torch that's mounted to your desk. So I did that workshop and it's just never really stopped since, Mandy. That was 14, 15 years ago.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And just looking through, your website and that kind of thing, it's clear that you really like upskilling and sort of trying new things, and you've done lots of different classes and courses over the years.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think I've got a definite strain of ADHD or something. Yeah, I do. I do. I love learning, and I get bored quite easily, I think. Although having said that, glass is probably the only thing I've stuck with. It's the longest thing I've stuck with ever in my whole life. But I think that is because there's so much to learn.
That's right. And it feels like there's lots of different sort of approaches and different techniques that you can use, but also like I've noticed too that you work in series. So it's almost like you get into something like your Mythology of Fruit series, and then you can explore that, and then you leave those techniques behind, or those ideas behind, and start something new. Although the Mythology of Fruit series is still going. But I like the way you can see your work has really evolved over the 14 years, and you've sort of dipped in and out of different themes, I guess, haven't you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really hard when you're in it to actually see the connections, between all of your work. Like, I really only feel now that are really sort of getting to the guts of what I really like to make, like around the theme. And it's always been, colour's always been, a big thing. But other than that, I think it's really hard when you're in it to see what you're really about.
Yes, I
And it
agree.
takes a long time. Yeah.
And sometimes I think when you look back on your practice, that's when you can start seeing things that you don't actually realize when you're in it. Like you can look back and
Yes.
think, actually, this is more cohesive than I thought,
Yes.
And when you look at old work, that's what I find. I'm like, oh yeah, I can see how that actually has led on to that or has connected with this or, you know.
Yes.
Can you describe your glass art practice and the kind of glass work that you do?
Before COVID, I was going to a lot of business kind of networking things just to I was really trying to work out where I was going and what I wanted to be. But because as soon as you say you do glass, everybody thinks glass blowing, and then you often get the silly jokes. And so I would introduce people and I'd say, "Hi, I'm Jo Tricker. I'm a glass blower. At the risk of sounding perverse, I don't blow." And and because it always made people laugh. And I mean, I'd say it in a funny way, but because you get a bit sick of those those kind of jokes, if you know what I mean.
Yes, the insinuations.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But I mainly do work that's in a kiln, so it's working with molds, basically, to shape the glass instead of blowing air into it, and then, as I mentioned, the lamp working is more like it's more like sculpting hot glass rather than blowing it. Although you can actually blow glass using a torch flame, which is a really nice way to do it at home because you don't need that big team of people and you don't need that the big furnace that has to be running 24/7. So you can blow smaller items on a glass torch, and then it's much easier to set that sort of practice up at home. So so it's mainly using kilns and molds and a gas torch. And then most of my work's actually about the places I've been and the people I've met, and also from a lot of books because I love reading. But it's mostly about different cultures. Like I'm just fascinated by different cultures and what makes them tick, and how their beliefs and their systems are different or the same as ours, and what their music and literature and what their songs are and what food they like to eat. I mean, I'm just, as soon as obviously, especially in New Zealand now, in your workplace or just being out and about, you're always exposed to different people from different, countries. And I just think it's really interesting, like finding out what they believe in and what they think. And it also makes you think about your own culture and what's good and bad about your own culture.
I mean, I'm not super familiar with the making of glass objects, but there are things like fusing and other techniques. What are the techniques that you mostly use, or do they vary from series to series?
Each series does seem to be more around one technique. So like you've got casting, which is very similar to lost wax casting for bronze is exactly the same for glass. So you have a wax model, you cover it in a material that would withstand the heat in the kiln, and then you steam out the wax, and then you're left with a hollow shape that you then fill with the glass in a nutshell. So that's casting. And then, as I said, fusing is more, you usually start with sheets of glass rather than working from a wax mold. You start from flat sheets of glass or slabs of glass, if you like, and you're, first of all, sort of fusing or sticking them all together with heat is a nice way to think of it, so that it's one big flat shape, I guess. And then you're putting that stuck together sheet of glass with its pattern on the top of a mold, and then it will sort of sink down over or into the mould. So that's what you call fusing and slumping. And then there's the lamp working. At the moment, actually, my series has focused just on just one of those techniques, but what I'm trying to do is actually bring them all together somehow so that you could have a series that uses all of them. I haven't got there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those series, as I said, it started off with jewelry, didn't it? And then it went
Yes.
into vessels and plates, which are really
Yeah.
beautiful.
Oh,
And
thank you.
and then, through to sort of more architectural pieces and the bricks, and then into the mythology of fruit, which
Yeah.
is also quite beautiful and quite different in a way to the other work that you've done. So
Yes.
how do you decide what you want to be thinking about, and does it kind of overlap, or how do you manage having different series, and do you come back to work that you did a long time ago?
Yeah, I think you do. With the lamp working, you're sitting down a lot at a torch. And now as I've got older, it's like, that can you get up and you're a bit stiff. And so like having a mix of working in the morning where you're sitting all morning and then in the afternoon where you're actually if you're doing fusing and slumping or casting, it's a much more physical process. You're moving around between two tables and it's process driven really, because if you're making a wax, you've got to wait until that sets before you can do the next step. So while the wax is setting, you might go off and work on another series with that different technique so that you're utilizing the time. And also, obviously, you've got the time that your work is in the kiln. But yeah, you're often doing other things while the work's cooking, if you like. Yeah.
And is there a recurring theme or gesture or material that keeps resurfacing in your work?
Obviously, it's all glass. I know there's lots of people that do mixed media. And I have got one piece that had a bit of wire and other stuff. But at the moment, it's purely glass just because that's so technical and trying to get your head around that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Alone. Yeah.
It must be a tricky thing too when the materials are quite expensive. Does that kind of get in the way of you playing and experimenting at all?
Yeah. So when I first started glass, I've never really been full time because I started when my kids were 4 and 2. And so, it's not like you're getting 40 or 50 hours a week. In fact, I think this is really important to point out, Mandy, for other people who have, and I mean, yourself, trying to do something around children. So if you look at your standard apprenticeship, which is 10,000 hours based on a 40-hour week, it works out to be, I think it's 4.75 years. And I've only just worked this out the other day, and it's been really helpful to quantify it. My 10,000 hours based on an average of 15 hours a week, because some weeks it's more, some are less, if the kids are sick, whatever. It's taken me 13 and a half years. So, wow. And I think it's really important to, for maybe people to work that out, because when you're any business really, if you're trying to do it at the same time as being the main carer, you can so often feel like you're getting nowhere. And you sit there and you think, but I've been doing this for 6 years. Why am I not getting anywhere? But if you sit down and actually quantify those hours out, it's not 6 years. And so, I'm in year 14. I'm only just emerging. No wonder I'm not really where I want to be. You know what I mean? So, and people say a long time. It's a long time. Yeah. And I think to keep that in your head is quite important, because you can lose sight of that and think that you're not any good. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good point to make, Jo.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if it's art or you start a good business, whatever you're doing, if you're the main carer, I think it really helps to have some, put some figures in front of you so that you can actually think, oh, hey, I'm actually doing pretty well considering all of that, Yeah.
So now with your youngest son in year 13, are you feeling like you're sort of coming into your time, where you can really devote
Yes.
more
And
time
it's
to your
so,
practice.
yeah, and it's so interesting because like that Mythology of Fruit series started last year, but I've had little goes at that technique off and on over the last 5 years, but never, you know what I mean? And it's that technique. It's not my technique. There's lots of people overseas doing it, but I haven't been able to find anybody teaching it. So it's really been piecing it together from the little bits I could find on YouTube, but last year, because my eldest is down in Christchurch, a lot of people said to me, "Wow, Jo, your work's really stepped up this year." And I'm like, "Yeah, I've got all this time."
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just, artists. I mean, like art is so time dependent. It's, it just takes such a lot of time to actually get really good, and you've got to hold on to that and know that, it is a really long journey. Yeah, and most of the people who are making money out of it, that's another thing that you put into perspective is, it's so easy to, look at Instagram and these amazing artists and think, wow, am I ever going to be like that? But when you really, if you take the time to look at their website or, just research them a bit, the ones who are making money, they've been doing it for like 18 to 20 years,
Or
Yeah.
longer.
Yeah, or longer. And longevity is a big thing in this industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
do think, I have talked about it on the podcast before, but my experience working every day on my art practice when I was in Turkey for
Yeah.
3 months was very enlightening. It made me realize that this is what I have to do to, really consolidate my practice and
Yeah.
to make progress and
Yes.
to really develop my ideas and my thinking and, allowing time for researching and all of those
Yes.
things, because I've always had so many other things happening.
Yeah.
I've never devoted myself enough. And now I see the importance of seeing it as a job that you do every day. I feel like it changes it. And then, I'm
Yes.
just feeling right now that I'm in this sort of transition time. I'm wanting to upskill. So, if I'm talking to different people about different courses or workshops so that I can kind of get that input from other people as well to
Yes.
then sort of lead on to me working more full time on my practice.
Yeah. Like once the kids were at primary school, that's pretty much what I did. 6 hours every day while they're at primary school. I was, working on more on the technique to begin with, because with glass, it is very technique driven. So you have to have the technique before you can put your ideas and your own, your own aesthetic and your own style into it. But I found, and I think this is another thing that, when you dream, if you're in if you're working in another job and you dream about being a full-time artist, I think the other thing that was really enlightening to me is that can really depend on your personality. Like I'm quite a social person. I love people. I get a buzz off people. Like, if I go out for an evening, I come home and I'm fizzing. Like I do, I just do feed off other people's vibe. And even though I was only 6 hours a day, I didn't realize in hindsight how depressed I'd got, because it was just too lonely for me. And so I think it's another thing just to be really aware of is, that might be your dream, but actually being on your own, every day on your studio can be lonely. And also you can start going down the own rabbit hole of your own head, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. I got a part-time job about, God, when was it? Actually, I think I've been working part-time, sort of as well as the kids. Originally it was only about 10 hours a week when the kids were younger. And now I still work 2 full days elsewhere, completely different industry at the hospital. But I was always really embarrassed to tell people that I work part-time, because you sort of felt like you weren't a proper artist if you weren't doing it full-time. But I've realized over the years, for those reasons, that number one, for me, it was my part-time job feeds my social part, which allows me to actually work really productively on my own for the other 3 days, although I get weekends now too. So it's, it's quite a lot more. And so if you're a social person and you're trying to do that full time, it may not work. And that actually does impede your artistic flow. So for about 5 years, I actually rented a studio. But then what happened is that constant thing in the back of your head that says, oh my God, you haven't made enough money this week. What are you going to do? For me also didn't work, because what I would do is I'd rush through work and try to make more of a product than an art piece, if you know what I mean, because I felt like I had to make more so that I had something to sell, which in the end backfired because it didn't sell because it wasn't very good. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
And I'm saying this purely from a personal point of view. None of that worked for me. I make much better art now that I'm working from home, and now that I have 2 days a week of an outlet for the social contact. But it also depends on your situation. My husband's a business owner, and so he leaves at 7:30 in the morning and he's back at 6:30 at night. And he's done that forever. And so, all those things can impact too. Like if your partner comes home at 4:00 and you've got more of that social time with them, if they're coming home at 4:00, they can maybe take the kids to the sports while you do your art. So all of that stuff comes into it, and you can't compare yourself to someone else unless they've got exactly the same circumstance. Because that's the other thing. We all do it. We can't help it. We look at other people and we think, oh my God, they're doing so well. What's wrong with me? And so you've got to bring that back and just think they might have a completely different lifestyle or set of expectations within the family than what you have. Yeah.
That's right. And that's so many good points that you've made there, Jo, which I'm sure our listeners and myself will benefit from, because it is true and it's very easy to compare yourself. Do you ever have problems with comparing yourself or with imposter syndrome or having doubt in your practice at all?
Oh my God, all the time. All the time. I mean, some months it's even on a weekly basis. I'm sitting in the studio and I'm thinking, what the hell am I doing? Why, I could have gone and worked, I could have been working somewhere else full time for all these years, and I would have had like trips overseas, and I would have had this and I would have had that. I think, even if you're doing art as a part-time basis, it's a real sacrifice. Like we said, until you get up to that 20-year mark, it is a real sacrifice. Like you're, I haven't been out of New Zealand for 17 and a half years. And for someone who did all that travel and who was based in the UK for, 3.5 years, that's been really hard too. But all the other stuff gets in the way. You have a mortgage. We bought our other business. You have little children. I mean, even if you had the money, sometimes you can't get away because, as you know, when you've got a business, it's very hard to walk away from. So all of that comes into it. But I think maybe if you are 100% happy with what you are making, maybe that's the point where you stop. Like if you make something you think, oh, well, that didn't come out of my head like I wanted it to. If you never had that, maybe that's why we keep going. I think we keep making because it's like that. It's that elusive journey of the ideas matching the ability that comes out of your hands.
Yeah.
Like you think in your head what this amazing piece is going to look like, and then you make it, and it's like, oh, that is just, maybe that's why we all keep making, it's that elusive point when the ideas and the ability from your hands meets in the middle. But then even once you'd achieved that, then you're probably still wanting to go on and make all those ideas, knowing they could be made. I don't know.
That's right. Yeah, it's just such a balance, isn't it, of bringing all those things together. And those sort of high success moments sort of feed you and give you fuel to continue. And, I imagine that especially with glass, there's lots of fails where, things break in the kiln and that must be quite hard for you.
There's been so many tears over the years, Mandy. I think the only thing I hold on to is one of my teachers years ago, she's based in Wanganui, and she was telling me she did her 4-year degree at NU University in Canberra. She said her whole first 4.5 years, 20% success rate. 20%, and that's just that's a full-time course, 4.5 years. So,
yeah,
and that's why when you see, that's why when you, maybe for every art, when you go into a gallery and you see that it's, I don't know, 10,000, 20,000, whatever. And I'm sure you've heard this before, you're not really paying just for that piece to be made. You're paying for all those years of breakages where you earn nothing to get to that point where you can sell a piece for $10,000 to $20,000.
Yeah.
And nobody sees that.
You're paying for experience and for all the ups and downs that an artist has been through to get to that point. Yeah.
It's like any business. Nobody ever sees behind the scenes. I walk around anywhere really, whether I'm in Auckland or Tauranga, and I look at, there's a business here, Craig's Investments, and that started with 2 people. And now I think they've got like 180 staff. And you'd understand this, being, anybody who's run a business, man, the hours, the mental agony, the psychology, the physical long hours required to get something to that point. I feel like, honestly, I walk around big cities and I feel like giving them all a badge. Anybody who's managed to start and have a business continue on for that long and to grow it to that amount of staff is phenomenal.
It's huge. Yeah. Now, I know that glass work is pretty technical and not all of us understand all the processes, but could you just explain to us perhaps one of the works that you make for the Mythology of Fruit series, if you could describe what those works look like and then how you actually make them, that would be really interesting.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so Mythology of Fruit obviously is really about the myths and legends associated with fruit from all over the world. And the series looks like glass lace. So if you can imagine lace, but it's in a 3D form structure. And if you imagine like pasta spaghetti, it's each straight piece is about, I don't know, 20, 30 centimeters long. So if you can imagine a glass rod, like a long stick of spaghetti, but it's solid glass and it's about 3 millimeter in diameter. And then you have a torch mounted to your working table, very, very similar to the welder's torch. So it gives off that same coloured sort of flame. And your torch is fed by, so it sits on your bench and it has 2 little hoses attached to one end of the torch, and one hose goes to your LPG source, so your standard barbecue bottle, and then the other hose is attached to an oxygen tank, exactly like what your underwater divers would use. So when you turn your torch on, both those gases are brought from their tanks or sources into the inside of the torch, and it mixes the 2 gases together and it puts it out just like a flame, which is about probably 30 centimetres in length. And you start by melting one end of that rod, and you're melting about 5 to 10 millimetres at a time until that section of the rod is like an orangey colour and it goes molten. And it's It's kind of actually like working with toffee. So if you melt toffee and it gets to the part where it's sort of, you can bend it, and then it's like drawing, it's almost like drawing in the air. So you're melting that tip of the rod until you can bend it and shape it, and you sort of make a little loop. You're making a frame out of the glass rods first, and the sides start from the middle center and they curve out and then back into the top center. And you're kind of fusing or melting that frame to stick it together. And then you're building these little loops of glass in between the frame. And you're just kind of building one loop on top of the other. And in a way, I guess if you think of it like almost like a crochet, like when you're building one loop of thread onto the other, your loop is sort of the hot glass. Yeah. And you just keep building it up. So the Mythology of Fruit's made with borosilicate glass, which if you think about your cooking dishes, the Pyrex, that's borosilicate. So it's very different from the glass they use for glass blowing at the furnace. So the furnace glass is really soft, and which is great because it's soft, you can blow it easily and sculpt it easier. But if you leave it out of the heat for too long, it just shatters. So the beauty of borosilicate is that you can heat it and then you can wave it. Like you could hold it up here to look, hold it like, a meter out in front of your nose to have a look at what shape you've made, and it doesn't crack. So it's got this different thermal property. But the downside is it's a much harder glass, so it takes a far more intense heat to melt it, if that makes sense. So all these brands of glass that we use, they've all got, their different sort of chemical structures that are pros and cons of everything. So the beauty of this Mythology of Fruit series is if you get halfway, if you only make, a quarter or half of it in one afternoon, you don't have to put it in the kiln. If it's summer, you can even let it cool down slowly on your bench. If it's winter, we have it like it's like a fiberglass blanket. So if you imagine the pink bats or the old pink bats they used to use, and you had a sheet of pink bat and you'd folded it in half like a blanket, you can just slide your borosilicate work into that and it cools it down slower. And so you don't actually need the kiln until you've finished the piece. So all glass has to be annealed, whether at some stage all glass has to be annealed. And
annealed means heated in the kiln.
It's like when I always liken it to, when you've gone to a party and it's like, you've been at the party since 8 o'clock and it's midnight and the party's at its height and like you've had a few drinks and like everything's a frenzy, like everyone's dancing and their arms are going everywhere and their mouths are going 100 miles an hour and all that. And then at about 2 o'clock you go home. But when you go home and you're still wired, like you can't go to sleep because you're still like, you're hyped up. So that annealing is like that 2 o'clock in the morning when you get home. And it's putting the glass into the kiln at a certain temperature for each brand. And what it does is it brings the molecular structure back to its strongest state. Because when you heat glass, the molecular structure changes, right? And when it cools down, it comes back to the strongest state that it likes to be in. We've got a can of fly spray. If you had a solid glass, that shape, that would need to be sitting in the kiln at its annealing temperature for probably maybe that size, maybe 2.5 to 3 days, all day and all night, just at that temperature before it cools further down. So every square centimetre of your solid glass or your glass has to be soaked at that temperature for so long.
It's very scientific, isn't it?
Yeah, and so if you go into if you went into a gallery and you saw, I don't know, a solid piece of glass that was say it was 1/2 metre by 1/2 metre square, that's probably been in the kiln for maybe 3 weeks, all day and all night, just at that annealing, strengthening temperature. So,
Wow.
there's a lot of your costs to begin with, right?
Yeah,
If you
exactly.
don't do that, if something's not been annealed, so say you bought it from a shop and you had it on your shelf at home and it had been there for 5 years, sweet as, all of a sudden a truck goes by, heavy, heavy truck, and it rumbles and it shakes that shelf, that piece could just shatter because it hadn't been annealed properly. And
Even after all that
so,
time.
yeah, 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 because that
Wow.
little weakness is sitting there just waiting to, do its thing. And so, like, when you're learning glass, that's one of the things they drum into you. The most, if you learn nothing from today, the most important thing is to anneal your glass because you do all that work and then it could just be ruined. Yeah.
And that must be so heartbreaking after so much, time and effort.
Oh my God, there's been a lot of tears, Mandy. I've even freaking thrown things at the bloody wall in the studio on occasion because I've just been so frustrated and effed off.
Yeah.
It's the worst thing about it is that the fault's usually your own, right? Because you've missed a step. And this is something else that's quite difficult if you're doing glass. And I think pottery is the same. If you're trying to do it around children, is that, you might do an hour one day, or say you did 3 hours one day, and then sometimes 5 days goes past before you get back to the studio. And then you've kind of forgotten where you were in that scientific part. And then you forget something. And then you put it in the kiln, it doesn't work, or it chips or explodes. So that's where I say, like, consistency is really important, even if you can do half an hour each day, but it's that consistent doing it each day that helps to cement that stuff in your brain. It was
Yeah.
really difficult when the kids were young.
I bet. It's all about taking notes as well, isn't it? And
Yes,
recording
yeah,
times
yeah.
and everything.
I mean, I remember when the kids were 6 and 3, and I had my first studio that was out of home, and it was only like, I don't know, 12-minute drive away, but I'd be at home and it'd be 11:30 at night, and I'd lie there and I'd go, oh my God, did I turn the oxygen tank off? And of course, you lie there, and the more you think about it, the more worked up you get. And so you'd get up and you'd sometimes just drive in your pajamas with the jumper on, and you go all the way up to the studio, unlock the door. And every single time I had turned the gas off, but you just can't because it's not your property. So all those sorts of things,
Yeah. You've got to be very systematic, I imagine.
Yeah.
And I guess it suits a certain type of personality, would you say?
Yeah, I'm always surprised that I ended up being with glass, actually, Mandy, because I never considered myself to be that kind of, consistent. So yeah, your medium surprises you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that you are very passionate about glass and
Yes.
working with glass. What is it that
Yes.
you love so much?
Oh, I think it's the thing you love is also the thing that you hate. It's the fact that it's never boring and you've always got something to learn. Of course, that's always the frustration of it too. But it's that, it's that going to the kiln when it's back at room temperature and that excitement of opening the door and just never quite knowing what you're going to see. And, obviously in your early days, it's often more hell than heaven. But as you go on longer, it's more heaven now. And it's just such an amazing medium. How can something that's a solid go from a solid to a liquid and then back to a solid, but it's in a different form? And how is it possible that you can blow this material? Like, that's insane. How is it possible you can, put air into something and have it expand and it keeps its form?
Yeah.
Like, it's very cool.
Yeah. How do you actually manage the work that you're making? Do you have quite a lot of different things on the go, or do you make a whole batch that then all goes into the kiln? Or I just imagine it must be quite hard to kind of coordinate works, especially if you've got a deadline.
You can use an example like your computer mouse and your fly spray can. Those two shapes require, because they're different sizes, require a slightly different firing schedule. And so you can't just pile in a whole lot of random shapes into the same kiln cycle. You also can't put different brands of glass into the same kiln cycle because they all heat and contract in different ways. So, yeah, you've got to manage that. That can be really hard.
Is that partly why you have worked in series so that you have kind of similar works using
Yes,
similar materials?
yes, because of course the other thing is you don't want to waste the power on a kiln cycle either. Like I've got 3 kilns, and one of them the internal size is 1 meter by 80 centimeters. So you're not going to just put one thing in that for one cycle, Yeah. And that's another reason why people are surprised how long things take to make. Well, it's not that one thing takes ages to make. It's that you've got to have other things that can go into the kiln with that same cycle at the same time. So, if you're casting something, it's easier to make 10 casts that are a similar size. You can have 10 animals. They're all different animals, but they're all a similar size, and that means they can all go into the kiln at the same time.
Yeah.
So you've got to manage that. That's quite tricky as well.
How do you actually plan for that?
Well, when you're learning, you don't really. It's just really, when you're learning, it is quite chaotic, and you probably do end up firing one thing in a kiln, at the risk of it being more expensive. But it's all knowledge. It's all knowledge and experience. Once you get more experienced at it, you can kind of manage that workload better. But you do have to kind of plan ahead a bit. You have to plan ahead for your supplies as well, because unfortunately New Zealand has we used to have gaffer glass, which was based in I can't think of that. Morningside it was based in, and they were here for 30 years. So you could go and look at the glass in person and look at the colours and actually, see what you're working with and take it home. But they moved offshore about, I think it's 6 years ago. So now all your glass has to be bought from overseas. You're buying from what you see online or from a catalogue, and that's really difficult. And also the freight can be really difficult. Like there's a couple of distributors in our we've got Melt 45 in Wanganui and Savarin's Glass in Penrose, and you can order stuff. But if you want something really quickly, because they only order like every 3 or 6 months, because it's got to be economic for them, and so they'll only order once every 3 to 6 months because it's either coming from Europe or America. And so outside of those times, if you just have this hankering, which often happens, it's like, but I really want a red, I really want that colour purple, and nobody's got it. That's frustrating. When you get Americans who move down here, they find it really frustrating because, of course, in America, you've just got supplies everywhere,
Yeah. Yeah, that would be really tricky. That's a whole other element that you've got to manage.
And just working out the exchange rate as well. You've got the exchange rate for the actual price of the glass, and then you've got the exchange rate for the freight, and then you've got to worry about if you're going to get stung at customs, and it's tricky. And I think it's really tricky for, those suppliers as well, because it is a very small, glass artist. There's only about, I don't know, maybe 150 to 200 of us in New Zealand. So, the suppliers have it's really hard for them too to get us what we need. It's
a tricky balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, really tricky.
Like I said, Mandy, full of frustration. So I think you've got to really love it, and you've got to just have a real, maybe we were all magpies in our previous life, right?
How do you manage your pricing? Because I feel like some of your pieces are reasonably affordable. I guess you have different kind of tiers with your pricing, but when you're having to think about freight and importing materials and all of the different elements, I can imagine it would get quite expensive.
Yeah, it does. And pricing's just another huge thing, Mandy. And a lot of pricing is psychological. Do you mean a lot of it comes down to how worthy you feel? I think, because I've had people say to me before, "Oh no, your work's too cheap," and then I know that I've said it to other people. I think they've been offended. But yeah, I've come to the conclusion that it's your self-worth. And it's taken me a really long time to think that, I know I should put my prices up, even right now as we're speaking, but it's a really, do you know what I mean? Like it's that self-worth thing. It's like, and other artists can say to you, you really should put your prices up. And it's like, it's purely psychological, I reckon. And the selling is too, like if you don't really believe in your work, buyers will sniff that out. That's what I've learned. And I've had to work really hard at the confidence side, particularly if you're going to an awards night where they meet the artist. It's like I've had to work really hard because that never came naturally to me. Look at these young people who started businesses in their mid-20s, and it's like they have no qualms about asking $500 for a dress. And I'm like, oh my God, but mine's not worth that. But it is, but it's this, that's your biggest enemy is what goes on inside your two ears.
So do you feel like you are getting braver about putting prices up?
I am, but I'm still not there. I know I need to do it, but
But your galleries would help you with that.
They're fantastic. That's why we have galleries, right?
Exactly. It sort of takes that part away slightly.
It's better to just have galleries. And I find like Mike at Art by the Sea especially, like he said to me one day, I'd like you to make something really big. And so I did. And it hasn't actually sold, but I'm still very proud of it because it's 1.8 meters high and it's on stand. And I put it out. I'd finished it, I think, the first year of COVID, so it probably wasn't the great timing either for like a big piece. But that's on the floor for I think it's $18,000 or $20,000. But Mike had to really talk me into that. And he was like awesome. He walked me around the gallery and he said, look, Joe, he said, look, this piece is worth that and this piece is worth that. And he said, your piece is up there and it is worth that. And that was huge. Like, I have to get back to making, I've got a whole series I'd like to do that's similar to that piece. But I just haven't had the time to do it. But I'd like to make 5 or 6 other big pieces like that.
Have you ever thought about entering your work into sculpture on the shore or any of those outdoor exhibitions?
Oh, no, I don't know if I'm good at outdoor, Mandy. There's all those other factors you have to think about, like how the wind's going to play, on the shape of the piece and securing it to a stand that, again, is not going to come off. Definitely in the future, but I'm sort of not there yet, I don't think. I'm still trying to perfect the stuff that's good for indoors. I have all these ideas about, outdoor stuff, but I just think, it's a little bit scary, to be honest.
It's something to work towards, isn't it? And what was that big piece for Mike?
Oh, she's called Nazy. She's 1.8 meters high, and it's actually if you know anything about the Massey tribe in East Africa, in Kenya. So there's a tribe there called the Maasai, and Nazy, which is also a Maasai female name. It's their traditional clothing. So if you think they had the big beaded collars. So it's got a bodice, so like a underneath, and then it has 2 pieces on the side, which if you think like a sarong, like a New Zealand sarong, well, they call them shukas, but it's how they wrap, they wrap those sort of material sarongs around them in certain ways, and then they have the big beaded collar around the top. So it's a four-part piece that goes together, and it hangs on a wooden stand that, and the bottom of the stand in the wood has the patterns of the beads engraved in it, and that was made by Kevin McArdle, who I used to share my very first studio out of my home. He was on the same premises, so I got him to make that. So it hasn't sold. I mean, it would be a very niche piece. Someone's got to have the space to put it, and you wouldn't want. You just need a big space where people aren't going to, knock it, sort of thing.
That sounds beautiful. We'll put an image of that on your blog post, which is on my website. So speaking of galleries, you are with, as you said, Art by the Sea with Mike and Linda in Takapuna. That's Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland.
Yep.
And Art by the River, that's in Whanganui. Church House Gallery in Nelson, up from Nelson, and Next Door Gallery in Birkenhead.
Yes.
So I guess those 4 galleries keep you pretty busy with.
Yeah, that's enough.
Yeah,
that's enough. And I mean, even some of them, I feel, sometimes I feel so bad because I haven't, been not always very regular with supplying stuff. Yeah, just life. Life gets in the way, but I do feel a bit guilty. My galleries are so nice to me. They don't hassle me for new work. So I'm very lucky, but I've got it.
They know they'll get it when they can, when you can do it. And you have participated in lots and lots of group shows over the years. Have you also had solo shows at all?
No, not yet, Mandy. It's definitely on the cards. I'm thinking probably next year I'd like to get into doing some more, like more that kind of thing, like either solo shows or like a show with one other person. This year, so last November, I actually I won a scholarship from Corning Museum of Glass in New York State in America. So hugely excited because that's been on my wish list. And so in May 28th this year, I fly out. And like I said, I haven't been out of New Zealand for 17 and a half years. So you can only imagine my excitement. Plus, I'm going to Corning Museum. So my scholarship was for the 3-day casting symposium, which is being held there. It's Corning Museum's 75th birthday. So it's the perfect year to be there. There's also the 4-day American Glass Society conference directly adjacent to that. So that's what I'm doing in June. So I've pulled back a bit from doing anything before that. My worst fear is letting someone down, right? So I don't, and that's why I've not done a solo exhibition either, because I just think, oh my God, but what if I didn't manage to get there, So,
but I feel like you're coming into a new time in your life. Another era in your artistic career where your parents, won't need you as much at some point, and then your children will become more independent. So, it's all going to open up from there. And I have noticed that you do enter quite a few awards, and you've been a finalist in a number of different awards. How do you feel about awards, and why do you like to enter them?
I think they push you to, because I often have ideas that may not fit what goes in the gallery. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I have lots of those, just don't have the time to carry them out. And so, some of those ideas fit an award, an award environment better than they would the gallery, like things like, like Molly Morpeth and Miles Art Award. The Miles has finished now. But and they also, I think they just give you something to, like a deadline to aim for too, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, depending how organised you've been. I mean, the last one for Rotorua, I remember saying to my husband, I had this piece and I just couldn't get it right. And the night before I had to deliver it, I stormed upstairs and said to my husband, it's effing terrible. I said, what am I doing? I said, it's just a waste of time. It looks like shit. Like I should pull it out, bloody, 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 blah. And I always end up sending it, but that's more because I've committed to sending it. But I'm not always happy with what I've sent. But I mean, you're your own worst critic.
Yeah. And you've still done well. I mean, you must feel good when you actually often do become a finalist.
Oh yeah, you do. And it's funny, like when you haven't, you send your work off, and then if you're able to go to the opening night, which I'm not always able to get to if it's in a different city, But sometimes you go to the opening night, and because you haven't seen that piece of work for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and you walk in and it's in a completely different setting, and sometimes you go, oh, wow, it actually looks really good. You know what I mean? And because it's just because you're so sick of looking at it,
Yeah.
you're looking at it every day, you can't see the wood for the trees.
Mm.
It's a different, it's just a different environment, a
Context.
different context. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And I
yeah.
guess it must sort of make you think, like, what am I going to make for this special event? And,
Yes,
how can I push myself or try
yes,
something different? And it's
yes.
like a one-off piece that doesn't have to sort of connect with other
Yes, yes,
work.
that's right. Yes. Also, I haven't got there yet, but it'd be lovely to win something, get some money.
Yeah, that's a
That would
bonus.
be an added bonus.
And
Yeah.
have you ever entered the regional art awards or art shows or art in the park or anything like that, or would you consider it?
I'm doing actually for the first time this year, I'm doing I get muddled up with these art show names because they're similar. It's Aotearoa art shows, but that's because they're actually doing one in Tauranga for the first time. And so I
Mm.
don't have to book accommodation and I don't have to, because it's really expensive. When you add all that up, you've got the accommodation, you've also got the time away from your studio where you're not making. Um, and you've got food while you're away. So you've got all of that, plus the entrance fee for the show. Um,
And all the
but
packaging,
yeah, and all the packaging. Yeah, that's another thing. The packaging and especially
framing.
glass, having to move it. I hate having to,
Mm.
package up glass. And even now when I send it, if I send it down to Richard out by the river, I'm like, oh no, I
Yeah.
packed it right. Is it going to be okay? Like it's awful. It's like watching a piano being moved. Um, but yeah, so doing my first sort of big show like that this year because it's in my hometown. It's just easy. I
Mm.
don't have to, I can run home if I've forgotten something or,
Yeah.
maybe even quickly finish something the night before if I'm running out of work. It's
Yeah,
yeah,
it's so true, and it's not something that gets talked about that often. Actually, it's actually a huge commitment, and you're so right saying that it's also time away from your studio.
yeah.
That I'd never thought of it like that, but it's true.
No. And if you work it out, like if a show is say $1,200 and then you've got accommodation and food, so that's, probably another $800, that's 2,000. To make 2,000, you've got to sell 4,000. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
Because if you sell 4,000 worth of product, 50% of that is commission or whatever. So you end up with 2,000. So, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know, I think it's because I'm married to a businessman. I do look at things,
yeah.
from an economic point of view. And my husband makes me look at it from an economic point of view too sometimes. So, which is, it's just another perspective that keeps
Yeah.
in
And
check.
I think
Yeah.
it's important, it is, we have to think about the business models for what we're doing as artists.
Well, because otherwise it's not sustainable. You can't, yeah, it
Mm.
doesn't make sense to just, well, to me, it doesn't anyway. It doesn't make sense to, just not be getting a return for your investment.
Yeah.
It's hard enough to getting the return on your time investment without all of that added on, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. And what advice have you been given that continues to influence your practice in some way?
Oh gosh, Mandy, how long have we got? I would say what I've said before is be in it for the long haul. Just even, if you're really limited on time, even just showing up, treating your studio like a job, like go to it every day. Don't get sidetracked by people who want coffees during the week. Because I wouldn't do that if I was working for someone else, right? So why would you do it? And if you've got short on time, even doing half an hour every day will keep that thing in your brain, rather than having big gaps. Um, another teacher said to me once, she said, "Jo, everything sells eventually." And I didn't really get that until in the past I've made something and it hasn't sold till 4 years later. But it did sell, so I think that was quite good as well. It just be prepared that it is going to be a long, hard ride, and it does require sacrifice. And those sacrifices might be different for different people, but there's still something that you have to give up if you really want to get there. As I said before, being a full-time artist might not suit your personality, so be aware of that. And I think there's a difference between being an artist and having an art business. And so, like, for me, an artist is somebody who makes everything they want, not to anybody else's brief or anything like that, right? It's solely your art. Whereas an art business is you might have 30% of your art that you want to make. You might have teaching, consulting, doing commercial work like trophies or I don't know, just something that's been made to order. And I think that's a big distinction to make as well. So if you want, how I look at it, if you want art to be a full-time thing, make it an art business. If you don't want it to be an art business, do your art and have a side hustle. If you need to make money, because if you need to make money from art, I think the art alone is really difficult to make money out of that, like we said, until you've been doing it for 20 years. And so you need to have some other business component to your sort of portfolio, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and working out what side hustles suit you,
Yes.
whether it is connected to your art or something completely different.
Yeah. And if you've got a side hustle that's a completely different industry, that still feeds into your practice. Like I work at the hospital, I transcribe doctors' reports, but even the conversations you have with colleagues sometimes trigger something in your practice. The software skills that you learn trigger, they're all helpful in your practice. So don't think that it's not, if it's a different industry, that doesn't matter. It can still, and you've got another audience, right? I've got a whole nother audience at work with the people I work with for my art. And, I've had so many people start following me since I've been working there. So, you know what I mean? Like there's, it can be a really good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a good point. I mean, it's just there's lots of benefits from whichever way you choose to go.
Yeah.
There's benefits, and it can really sort of enrich what you're actually doing in your practice.
Yeah, and it's it's not right or wrong. It's just what fits for you, what makes you happy. Yeah.
And who inspires you? Who or what inspires your work?
Oh my goodness, I've got so many, Mandy, so many Australian, American, English, and New Zealand glass artists. So New Zealanders like Emma Camden, Justin Kalina, Karen Barr, Evelyn Dunstan, and people like Dai Toka and Lava Glass and Taupo. Also, I find really inspirational from not just their art side, but their business side. Like you look at Lava Glass, they started that. There was just the two of them. They started that I don't know, it might be 25 years ago now. And look what they've built that into, and they've got kids. They've done that all around kids. So, I think those sorts of things are really inspiring too, like not just the art side, but the business side. Also, quirky artists in America like Dan Friday and what's the other one? Sorry, I had it written here. Oh, yeah, Dan Friday and Dan Daly, American glass artists. Sabrina Kent, who's British, Tom Rawlinson, who's British, Colin Reid. Anyway, I could go on. And otherwise, I mean, I get inspiration from poems, could be just a line I've read in a book. It could be a colour. It could be from, I love lots of, as I said before, I love lots of, I guess you'd call it folk art, but things like Mexican textiles and the Mexican pottery and, how the people in Laos make their tie-dyed material and the West African patterns.
And what are you hoping to achieve as an artist?
I think what we were saying before, that point where your vision in your head meets your ability in the fingers, but also to be more sustainable financially, to get to the point where I've got more confidence to ask for those bigger prices, and to just make bigger, and just to be the best glass artist I can possibly be. Like I said, those millions and masses of ideas out there that just haven't come to fruition yet.
Yeah, but then they will. I feel like you're, on the cusp of a really exciting time. And
I might need to live to 150, Mandy.
Yeah, that's the problem. Not enough time.
I know.
What are you most proud of as an artist?
Just being able to keep it going, really, like with the kids, and like all the things we've talked about, the technical frustrations, and that's one of the things that, if you're a glass blower and you have that team around you, you've always got people to troubleshoot with. Most of us are, like many artists, you're working on your own, and it's like things go wrong, and Mrs. Google doesn't always answer those questions, and, like you can ring your friends, but it's not the same as having that piece of glass in front of you that's got the mistake in it, and having that other pair of eyes in person to be able to problem solve. I mean, that's one of the things I'm so excited about going to America is just having quite a lot of those, but particularly in the borosilicate kind of area, because there's so many people in New Zealand doing it. So just having lots of my technical problems being able to be helped.
Yeah, and getting
and then,
through it.
once you've got that, you can bring that back home and help other people. Because I teach lamp working about once a month. I have lessons available. So, being able to bring a lot of that knowledge back and help other people, because if no one's coming up underneath you, where does this industry go? Like, it dies, right?
Yeah.
And that's why you need people who are happy to share their knowledge. Like, I've had some amazing, Evelyn Dunstan, just so underrated. She's amazing. She's the best New Zealand teacher I've ever had. So, having people like that in your life is precious. Like, yeah.
Yeah. And I love the way throughout your career you've really tapped into different people and learned from them and done different courses and workshops and that kind of thing. And I feel that's like a very important part of your practice is
yes,
learning.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jo. You've been such a joy to talk to. And I
you,
love
Mandy.
your infectious enthusiasm. And it's been really interesting talking about your practice, which is so incredible. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Mandy. That's given me, an opportunity to, to talk about me, which we all really love, don't we? We've got the chance to say, what we think and feel. So, yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.